At 4 a.m., crime boss Adrian Moretti pushed open the door to his penthouse, expecting the same silence that had greeted him for months, the silence of a woman who'd learned her place. Instead, he found a different kind of quiet, the kind that screams. Half the closet stood empty. Divorce papers waited on the marble counter beside a letter that would destroy him more than any bullet ever could. For 15 years, he'd ruled this city without mercy. But the woman he'd taken for granted had just done something no enemy ever managed. She'd walked away. If you want to see how a king falls, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Because what Adrian Moretti was about to learn would change everything. The Mercedes S-Class purred through the empty streets of downtown, its black exterior reflecting the amber glow of streetlights like liquid gold. Adrian Moretti sat in the back seat, his phone pressed to his ear, barely listening to Marco's report about the shipment coming through the docks. His mind was elsewhere, specifically on the woman he'd left sleeping in the hotel suite 2 hours ago. Vanessa. 26, legs that went on forever, and absolutely no complications. No questions about where he'd been, no accusations, no tears, just exactly what he needed after 15 years of marriage that had grown as cold and predictable as January rain. Boss, you still there? Adrian blinked, refocusing. Yeah. Make sure Romano handles the inspection personally. I don't want any surprises. Got it. And boss? Isabella called the office today, 3rd time this week. Adrian's jaw tightened. What did she want? Didn't say. Just asked if you'd be home for dinner on Thursday. Tell her I'll be working late. The same answer he'd given for the past 6 months. The same answer that had become easier and easier to deliver. Marco hesitated. You want me to actually tell her that, or she'll figure it out? Adrian ended the call. The car glided to a stop in front of the Moretti building, 32 floors of steel and glass that served as both his legitimate business headquarters and the crown jewel of an empire built on considerably less legitimate foundations. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor, a monument to everything Adrian had clawed his way up from nothing to achieve. Want me to wait, boss? His driver asked. No, I'm in for the night. Adrian stepped out into the cool, pre-dawn air, straightened his Tom Ford suit jacket, and headed for the private elevator. His reflection in the polished brass doors showed a man in his prime, 42 years old, silver threading through dark hair in a way that added gravitas rather than age. A face that had launched 1,000 profitable deals and twice as many fearful negotiations. He looked like exactly what he was. Untouchable. The elevator rose silently, counting off floors in glowing numbers. Adrian loosened his tie, already anticipating the routine that awaited. Isabella would be asleep, or pretending to be, in their bedroom. He'd shower in the guest bathroom to avoid waking her, then slip into bed around 5. By the time he woke at 9, she'd have coffee ready and the financial section of the Times waiting beside his breakfast plate. 15 years of marriage had created patterns as reliable as clockwork. The elevator chimed softly, doors sliding open to reveal the penthouse foyer. Adrian stepped out, keys already in hand, and stopped. Something was wrong. The penthouse was never completely dark. Isabella insisted on leaving the lamp in the entryway lit, a habit from their early days when they'd lived in a neighborhood where coming home to a dark apartment meant checking corners before relaxing. But tonight, the foyer lamp was off. Only the ambient glow from the city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the space. Adrian flipped the switch. Light flooded the marble entryway, revealing nothing out of place. Same abstract sculpture Isabella had insisted on buying at that gallery opening 3 years ago. Same console table with the silver tray for keys and mail. Same everything, yet different. He couldn't put his finger on it at first. Then he realized silence. Not the sleeping house silence he was used to, but something deeper, emptier. Isabella? No answer. Adrian moved through the living room, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floors. Everything looked untouched. The throw pillows on the white sofa were arranged just so. Isabella's doing, always concerned with appearances. The art books on the coffee table sat in perfect alignment. The curtains hung exactly as they always did. But the air itself felt different, hollow. He headed down the hallway toward the master bedroom, a tendril of something unfamiliar curling in his chest. Not quite worry. Adrian Moretti didn't worry, but perhaps awareness. The kind that had kept him alive in a business where awareness meant the difference between ruling and dying. The bedroom door stood open. Adrian stepped inside and immediately saw what his instincts had been screaming about. The bed was made. Not just made, pristine, untouched. The duvet pulled so tight and smooth it looked like a hotel bed waiting for its first guest. Isabella never made the bed this perfectly. She made it well, but there were always small imperfections, a slight wrinkle in the duvet, pillows that weren't quite symmetrical, the small touches of someone who lived in a space rather than staged it. This bed looked like no one had slept in it at all. Adrian's eyes traveled to the closet, and his chest constricted. The double doors stood partially open, revealing a space that should have been packed with Isabella's clothes. Instead, half the closet gaped empty. Her dresses were gone. Her shoes, all those designer heels she wore to charity galas and business dinners, vanished. His suits and shirts hung in their designated space, but where Isabella's wardrobe should have created a wall of color and fabric, there was only the stark white of empty shelving and vacant hangers. What the hell? Adrian strode to the closet, yanking the doors fully open. His side remained exactly as he'd left it. Her side looked like someone had performed a surgical extraction, removing precisely half of everything. Not all of it. That's what made it so deliberate. She'd left things. The cocktail dress she'd worn to his birthday party 2 years ago. A few pairs of shoes he'd bought her. The emerald necklace that had been his grandmother's. She'd left the things that connected to him. Taken only what was truly hers. Adrian's mind raced, trying to construct an explanation that made sense. A trip? But Isabella always told him when she traveled, always left detailed notes about where she'd be and when she'd return. A family emergency? Her parents were dead, and her sister lived 2 hours away in Hartford, hardly far enough to warrant packing half a closet. He moved through the bedroom with increasing urgency, checking details. Her laptop, gone from its usual spot on the writing desk. Her jewelry box, still there but lighter. When he opened it, all the expensive pieces he'd given her over the years remained. The simple gold bracelet she'd owned since college, gone. The pearl earrings from her mother, gone. A small enamel ring that had no monetary value but that she wore constantly, gone. She'd taken the things that meant something to her, left everything that meant something to him. Adrian walked back into the living room, his breathing slightly faster now, that unfamiliar feeling in his chest growing stronger. Still not quite fear, Adrian Moretti didn't fear, but something in that neighborhood, something he hadn't felt since he was 17 years old and facing down his first real threat. Uncertainty. His eyes landed on the kitchen counter, and he saw it. A single cream-colored envelope propped against the coffee maker, his name written across the front in Isabella's elegant handwriting. Adrian. Nothing more, just his name. He picked up the envelope, surprised to find his hands completely steady. Whatever this was, whatever game Isabella thought she was playing, he'd handle it. That's what he did. He handled things. Situations. People. Problems. Adrian tore open the envelope and pulled out 2 items. The first was a set of papers, neatly stapled, official-looking. He scanned the header and felt the floor tilt slightly beneath his feet. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words seemed to swim before his eyes. Divorce papers. Actual, legal, filed divorce papers. Not a threat. Not a draft. Already filed with the court. Already in motion. Already real. His eyes jumped to the signature line. Isabella had already signed. Her signature, the same one she'd used to sign their marriage certificate 15 years ago, now appeared on paperwork designed to undo everything that ceremony had created. The second item was a letter. 1 page. Handwritten. He recognized the stationery, expensive cream cardstock they kept in the study for formal correspondence. Adrian's eyes moved across the words, and with each line, the floor beneath him grew less solid. Adrian. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not hiding, just gone. Somewhere you won't find me, somewhere I can finally breathe. I won't burden you with accusations. You know what you've done. More importantly, I know what I've allowed. For months I watched you slip away. I saw the late nights turn into absent nights. I smelled her perfume on your clothes and saw the receipts you stopped bothering to hide. I could have screamed. I could have thrown things and made demands and played the role of the wronged wife. But I realized something. You were waiting for that. waiting for me to give you a reason to paint me as crazy, emotional, unreasonable, waiting for justification. I won't give you that satisfaction. Instead, I gave myself something better: time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Adrian Moretti. Do you remember her, Adrian? The girl who painted, who believed in art and beauty and possibility? You fell in love with her once. Then you systematically dismantled her, piece by piece, year by year, until all that remained was a well-dressed ghost who smiled at your business partners and stayed silent at your table. But ghosts can't file divorce papers. Ghosts can't empty bank accounts or hire lawyers or plan exits. So I had to become real again. Solid. Whole. Thank you for making it easy. While you were busy with her, I was busy remembering how to be me. The papers are filed. My lawyer will contact yours. I've taken only what I brought into this marriage and what I earned myself. The rest is yours. The penthouse, the cars, the empire you built. Keep it all. I never wanted any of it anyway. I wanted you, the real you. The boy who took me to that terrible diner on our first date and couldn't afford dessert but still left a generous tip because he said working people deserved respect. The man who stayed up all night with me when my mother died, just holding my hand in the hospital corridor. But that man disappeared somewhere between the first million and the first threat you made to someone who crossed you. And I can't keep mourning someone who's already gone. Don't look for me. Don't send your people after me. I'm not a business deal to close or a problem to solve. I'm just a woman who finally chose herself. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. I truly do. But I won't be there when you realize it was here all along. Isabella Adrian read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. Each time the words remained the same, their meaning growing sharper and more impossible with repetition. She was gone. Actually gone. He walked to the window, staring out at the city spread below like a carpet of lights. His city. The empire he'd built from nothing, from the streets of Brooklyn where he'd grown up dodging bill collectors and his father's fists. Every building, every business, every connection, he'd fought for all of it, bled for it, killed for it, though that was something no court would ever prove. And somewhere in building that empire, his wife had packed half a closet and disappeared. Adrian pulled out his phone, dialing Marco before his rational mind could catch up with his instincts. Boss? Everything okay? Isabella's gone. A pause. Gone like out for the night? Gone like divorce papers and empty closets. I need you to... Stop. Marco's voice cut through Adrian's rising panic with surprising firmness. Before you say what you're about to say, think. Really think. Adrian's jaw clenched. I'm not asking for advice. I'm telling you to... To what? Track down your wife like she's some kind of fugitive? Send guys to drag her back? Boss, with all respect, you know how that looks. You know what that makes you. The words hit harder than Adrian wanted to admit. He did know. He knew exactly what it made him, the thing he'd always sworn he'd never be. His father. A man who confused control with love and fear with respect. She filed papers, Marco, legal papers. This isn't some tantrum. No, Marco agreed quietly. It's not. Which maybe means you need to let your lawyer handle the lawyer stuff, and you need to, I don't know, boss, figure out why she left in the first place. Adrian ended the call without responding. He didn't want wisdom. He didn't want perspective. He wanted his life to make sense again, to return to the comfortable patterns he understood. But even as the thought formed, he knew it was already too late. He walked back to the bedroom, letter still in his hand, and caught sight of himself in the full-length mirror. Same expensive suit, same confident posture, same face that had stared down rivals and negotiated impossible deals. But for the first time in years, Adrian Moretti saw something he didn't recognize, a man who'd won everything and lost something he couldn't name. The clock on the nightstand read 4:47 a.m. In 12 hours, he had a meeting with the Calabrese family about the port expansion. In 24 hours, he was supposed to attend a charity gala where Isabella would normally appear at his side, the perfect accessory to his power. He thought about Vanessa, probably still asleep in that hotel suite, unaware that the uncomplicated arrangement they'd enjoyed was about to become very complicated indeed. Then he thought about the letter. One line in particular kept echoing, I wanted you, the real you. Adrian sank onto the edge of the untouched bed, divorce papers in one hand, letter in the other, and realized that for the first time since he was 17 years old, he had absolutely no idea what to do next. The city stretched out beyond his windows, glittering and oblivious. Somewhere in all those lights, Isabella was breathing free air, sleeping in a bed he'd never see, beginning a life that didn't include him. And Adrian Moretti, who controlled everything and everyone, couldn't do a damn thing about it. The following morning, Adrian didn't sleep. He sat in the living room as dawn broke over the city, letter and divorce papers spread on the coffee table before him like evidence at a crime scene. Which, in a way, they were, evidence of a slow murder he'd committed without even noticing. At 7, he called his lawyer. "Theodore, it's Adrian. I need you at the office in an hour." "Good morning to you too," Theodore Wainwright replied dryly. The man had been Adrian's legal counsel for a decade, handling everything from corporate mergers to the occasional inconvenient body that needed legal cleanup. "What's the emergency?" "Isabella filed for divorce." Silence. Then, "I see. When?" "I found the papers this morning. She's gone. Took half her things and vanished." "And you want me to—" "What, exactly?" "Fix it. Fight it. Find a loophole. That's what I pay you for." Theodore sighed. "Adrian, I'm going to say something you won't like. If Isabella filed papers and left, actually packed and left, this isn't something I can fix. This is something you need to address. I'm not paying you for therapy recommendations. No, you're paying me for legal advice. Here it is. If your wife wants a divorce, she'll get one. New York is a no-fault state. All she has to establish is that the marriage has been irretrievably broken for 6 months. Can you honestly say it hasn't been?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. "What you need to decide," Theodore continued, "is whether you want to make this easy or hard. Easy means you negotiate fairly, divide assets reasonably, and move on with your lives. Hard means you fight, drag her through court, make everything public and ugly. And hard also means every business associate, every rival, every law enforcement agency watching you gets to see the details of your personal life spread across court documents." The implicit threat was clear. Adrian's empire existed in shadows and careful discretion. A messy public divorce would shine lights in places that needed to stay dark. "Set up a meeting with her lawyer," Adrian said finally. "I want to know what she wants." "I'll make some calls. Adrian?" Theodore paused. "For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry." Adrian hung up without responding to the sentiment. Sorry didn't change anything. Sorry didn't undo months of choices. Sorry didn't bring Isabella back. By 8 o'clock, Adrian's phone was ringing constantly. Word had spread, the way word always spread in his world, that something was wrong at the top of the Moretti empire. His lieutenants wanted reassurance. His business partners wanted confirmation that personal matters wouldn't affect professional obligations. His mother called 3 times, and he ignored every call. At 9, he finally showered and changed, choosing a fresh suit from his perfectly organized half of the closet. The empty space where Isabella's clothes should have been seemed to mock him with every glance. Marco appeared at 9:30, letting himself in with the key Adrian had given him years ago. "Coffee," Marco announced, carrying a tray with 2 cups from the cafe downstairs. "And before you bite my head off, you look like hell and you need to eat something." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're standing in an empty penthouse drinking scotch at 9:30 in the morning, staring at divorce papers like they're written in a language you can't read." Adrian glanced at the tumbler in his hand. When had he poured that? And set it down. "Theodore's setting up a meeting with her lawyer." "Good. That's good." Marco settled into one of the armchairs, studying Adrian with the frank assessment of someone who'd known him long enough to call out bullshit. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway." "When's the last time you and Isabella had a real conversation? Not logistics about schedules or who's attending what event, an actual conversation." Adrian opened his mouth to answer and realized he couldn't. Days? Weeks? Months? Their interactions had become so scripted, so transactional, that he couldn't pinpoint the last time they talked about anything that mattered. "That's what I thought," Marco said quietly. "Boss, I like you. You know that. You pulled me up from running numbers for the Calabrese crew and gave me real responsibility. I owe you everything." "But Isabella?" He shook his head. "I always wondered what a woman like that was doing with a guy like you. No offense." "None taken. Adrian's voice came out flat. She was good, man, like genuinely good. Remember that Christmas she organized the toy drive for the shelter in Red Hook? Or when she convinced you to fund that arts program at her old high school? She wasn't doing it for show. She actually cared. And somewhere along the way, you stopped noticing. I noticed. Even as he said it, Adrian knew it was a lie. You noticed she was there. You didn't notice her. And definitely didn't notice when she started disappearing inside herself. Marco stood, heading for the door. The meeting with the Calabrese family is at 2. You want me to push it? No, business doesn't stop. Boss? One more thing. That girl you've been seeing, Vanessa? Adrian's jaw tightened. What about her? End it. Today. Because whatever you think you're doing with her, it's done. And dragging it out just makes you look worse. After Marco left, Adrian stood alone in the penthouse that suddenly felt too large and too empty. He thought about Vanessa. Gorgeous, uncomplicated Vanessa who asked for nothing except expensive dinners and hotel suites. She'd seemed like freedom from the weight of Isabella's silent disappointment. But standing here now, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's carefully planned exit, Vanessa felt less like freedom and more like exactly what Isabella had called it, a distraction. He picked up his phone and sent a text. We need to talk, tonight. Then he did something he hadn't done in 15 years of marriage. He looked, really looked, at the photographs displayed throughout the penthouse. Pictures Isabella had selected and arranged, creating a visual history of their life together. There was their wedding photo. Isabella in a simple white dress, him in a rented tux that didn't fit quite right, both of them glowing with the kind of naive certainty that belongs only to people who haven't yet learned how badly love can fail. They'd gotten married at City Hall with Marco and Isabella's sister as witnesses, then celebrated with Chinese takeout in the one-bedroom apartment they could barely afford. Another photo from their 5th anniversary. Dinner at a restaurant Adrian had saved for months to afford. Isabella laughing at something he'd said, her hand covering his across the table. He could still remember that laugh, full-bodied and unguarded, the sound of someone completely at ease. When had he last heard her laugh like that? More photos. Isabella at various charity events, always elegant, always composed. Isabella cutting the ribbon at the art gallery she'd helped fund. Isabella standing beside him at the groundbreaking for the Moretti building, smiling for cameras while her eyes held something distant and sad. In every photo from the last 5 years, Adrian noticed the same pattern. Isabella was present, perfectly dressed, appropriately positioned. But her eyes, those eyes that had once looked at him with such warmth, had grown progressively cooler, more guarded, more absent. He'd been living with a ghost and hadn't even noticed. His phone buzzed with the text from Vanessa. Tonight works. Should I come to the usual place? Adrian stared at the message, then at the wedding photo, then back at the message. The usual place. They had a usual place. A routine for an affair, as mundane and predictable as any marriage. He typed, Actually, let's make it coffee. Public. Midtown. There's something I need to tell you. Her response came quickly. Is everything okay? He didn't answer. How could he explain that everything was the opposite of okay? That his wife had left him, his carefully controlled life was unraveling, and he was only now beginning to understand what he'd destroyed. The meeting. At 2 o'clock, Adrian sat in his office conference room, surrounded by 3 members of the Calabrese family and their lawyers. They were negotiating expansion rights at the port of Newark, a deal that would be worth millions and required careful diplomacy given the Calabrese family's historical territorial sensitivities. The way we see it, Don Calabrese said, his thick fingers drumming on the mahogany table, a 50-50 split makes sense. Equal investment, equal return. Adrian would normally have argued for 60-40. The Morettis were bringing more resources, more infrastructure, more risk. But today, sitting across from these men while his marriage dissolved in legal paperwork, Adrian found he didn't care about the extra 10%. 50-50 is acceptable. Every person in the room went silent. Marco's eyes widened slightly, the only outward sign of his shock. You're agreeing. Don Calabrese leaned back, suspicion creasing his weathered face. Just like that? It's fair, Adrian said simply. You're right. Equal investment should mean equal return. The meeting wrapped up in record time, all parties too surprised by Adrian's unexpected reasonableness to push their luck. After the Calabrese family left, Marco remained behind. What the hell was that? A negotiation. That was a surrender. You could have gotten 60-40 easy. They were expecting you to fight. Adrian looked at his second-in-command, this man who'd been loyal through everything, and felt something crack inside him. Marco, what's the point? The point of what? Any of it. The empire, the money, the power. What's the goddamn point if you come home to an empty penthouse at 4 a.m? Marco sat down slowly. Boss, she was right there. For 15 years she was right there. And I was so busy building all this. Adrian gestured at the office, the view, everything his empire encompassed, that I didn't notice I was losing the only thing that actually mattered. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Adrian rubbed his face, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Theodore's setting up a meeting with her lawyer. Beyond that, I have no idea. You could fight for her. She doesn't want to be fought for. She wants to be free of me. The letter made that pretty clear. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Can I see it? The letter? Adrian pulled the folded paper from his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it around all day like a talisman, and handed it over. Marco read it carefully, his expression growing more somber with each line. This is a woman who's been hurt for a long time, Marco said finally. But you know what I don't see in here? Hate. Anger, yes. Sadness, definitely. But not hate. That's something. What good does that do me? Maybe none. But maybe it means she doesn't want you to suffer. She just wants to breathe again. Marco handed back the letter. The question is, are you going to let her? The coffee shop. At 6 o'clock, Adrian sat in a Starbucks in Midtown, possibly the least romantic location he could have chosen, which was exactly the point. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes late, as she always did, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than his first car. This is different, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Since when do we do coffee shops? Since this morning, when my wife filed for divorce. Vanessa's perfectly made-up face went blank. Oh, yeah, oh. Adrian leaned back in his chair. I'm going to be direct, Vanessa. This thing between us, whatever it was, it's done. Because of the divorce? Because it was always going to be done. I was just too stupid to see it. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. He seemed to be dealing in envelopes today and slid it across the table. There's $50,000 in there. Consider it severance or an apology or whatever you want to call it. Vanessa opened the envelope, looked at the check, then at Adrian. I don't need your money. Take it anyway. Use it for whatever you want. Just take it. She studied him for a long moment, and Adrian saw a calculation in her eyes. The same calculation he'd probably see in the mirror if he looked hard enough. They'd both been using each other, just in different ways. Can I ask you something? Vanessa folded the check and put it in her purse. Did you ever actually want me? Or was I just convenient? The honest answer would hurt them both, so Adrian went with it anyway. I wanted what you represented. Freedom from responsibility. Freedom from feeling like I was failing someone who deserved better than what I'd become. But that's not your fault, Vanessa. That's mine. She nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I hope you fix things with your wife. She must be pretty incredible if losing her is what it took to wake you up. After she left, Adrian sat alone in the coffee shop, surrounded by the mundane sounds of steaming milk and casual conversation, and felt more lost than he had in 25 years. Since he was 17 and decided he'd rather risk everything building an empire than accept the slow death of poverty and powerlessness. He'd built that empire, conquered the city, became the kind of man people feared and respected in equal measure. And in the process, he'd lost the girl who'd believed in the boy he used to be. His phone rang. Theodore. I spoke with Isabella's lawyer, Jennifer Cho, sharp as they come. She's willing to meet tomorrow at 10, but she made something very clear. What's that? Isabella doesn't want anything from you except her freedom. No alimony, no division of assets beyond what she brought in or earned separately. She's even leaving the apartment in Hartford that her parents left her, signing it over to her sister. She wants a clean break, Adrian. Complete. Something about that hurt worse than if she'd asked for half of everything. She's really done. Completely. Which brings me to my next question. What do you want? What do I want? From this process, from the divorce, what outcome are you looking for? Adrian stared out the coffee shop window at the pedestrians rushing past, everyone moving towards something or away from something else. What did he want? I want her to be happy, he heard himself say. Even if that means letting her go. Theodore was silent for a beat. That's probably the most decent thing I've heard you say in 10 years. I'll inform Ms. Cho that we're prepared to proceed cooperatively. After the call ended, Adrian remained in the coffee shop until the barista started giving him pointed looks about the evening rush. Then he walked out into the Manhattan twilight and did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He went home to an empty apartment, ordered pizza from a place that didn't require reservations or a business account, and ate it straight from the box while sitting on the floor of his ridiculously expensive living room. And for the first time since he'd opened that envelope and found his world turned inside out, Adrian Moretti let himself feel what he'd been avoiding all day. Not anger, not denial, not the urge to control or fix or manipulate the situation, just loss. Pure, absolute, irreversible loss. The kind that couldn't be negotiated away or solved with money or power. The kind that came from destroying something precious and only recognizing its value once it was already gone. He pulled out Isabella's letter one more time, reading the words that had been burning in his mind all day. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. I truly do. But I won't be there when you realize it was here all along. And Adrian Moretti, crime boss, empire builder, man who controlled a city, finally understood what his wife had been trying to tell him all along. He'd been looking for everything except the one thing that mattered, and now it was gone. The pizza box sat abandoned on the marble floor, grease seeping through the cardboard onto the white rug Isabella had chosen for this exact spot 3 years ago. Adrian stared at the stain spreading slowly outward and didn't move to stop it. What was the point? She wasn't here to care about the rug anymore. His phone buzzed against the coffee table. His mother. Again. Adrian let it go to voicemail for the 4th time that evening, listening to her muffled voice through the speaker. Adrian, please call me back. I spoke to Maria Calabrese at the market today and she mentioned the divorce. Why am I hearing about this from Maria? Call your mother. The voicemail ended. 2 seconds later, another call. This time, Marco. Adrian answered. What? Just checking you're still breathing. I'm breathing. You alone? Yeah. Good. Stay that way. Don't call anyone. Don't go anywhere. Just sit with it for a night. Marco paused. I know it's not your style, boss, but trust me. Sometimes you gotta let yourself feel like shit before you can think straight. When did you become a therapist? When I watched you spend 15 years turning into someone I barely recognize. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's gonna be rough. The call ended before Adrian could respond. He looked around the penthouse. 3,200 square feet of luxury that suddenly felt like a museum dedicated to his own failures. Everything here told a story. The sectional sofa where Isabella used to curl up with a book on Sunday mornings. The dining table where they'd hosted dozens of dinners for people Adrian needed to impress, while Isabella made everyone feel welcomed and valued. The piano in the corner that she'd played sometimes late at night when she thought he was asleep, sad melodies that he'd never asked about. He'd lived in this space for 8 years and never really seen it. Adrian stood, his body heavy with exhaustion, and walked to the piano. Sheet music sat on the stand, something classical he didn't recognize. He touched the keys gently, producing a discordant note that echoed through the empty room. Isabella had tried to teach him once, early in their marriage. It's not that hard, she'd said, guiding his fingers to the right positions. You just have to feel it. But Adrian had been too impatient, too focused on deals and territory, and building something that would prove he'd escaped the poverty of his childhood. I don't have time for this, he'd told her, pulling his hands away. The disappointment in her eyes had lasted only a moment before she'd smiled and said, That's okay. Maybe someday. Someday had never come. Adrian closed the piano and headed toward the master bedroom, then stopped. He couldn't sleep in that bed. Not the one she'd made so perfectly it looked like a reproach. Instead, he grabbed a blanket from the hall closet and settled on the living room sofa, the same spot where Isabella used to read. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories arrived in relentless waves. Their first apartment, a fifth-floor walk-up in Queens with a radiator that clanked all night and neighbors who fought so loudly they'd learned everyone's business through the thin walls. Isabella had painted the whole place herself while Adrian worked 18-hour days trying to establish himself. He'd come home exhausted to find her covered in paint, grinning like she'd accomplished something miraculous. "It's home now," she'd said. "Our home." Their first real fight. Something stupid about Adrian missing her birthday dinner because a meeting ran late. She'd cooked for hours, set the table with candles and flowers from the bodega. By the time he'd arrived at midnight, everything was cold and she was sitting in the dark. "You could have called," she'd said quietly. Not yelling. That would have been easier, just quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any accusation. The night he'd finally made his first million, legitimate money, clean money, the kind that came from the construction company he'd built from nothing. He'd rushed home to tell her, expecting celebration. Instead, she'd looked at the number on the bank statement and asked, "Is this what you wanted?" He'd said yes without hesitation. She'd smiled, but something in her eyes had dimmed. "Then I'm happy for you." Years of moments, years of small choices that seemed insignificant at the time, but had somehow accumulated into this: divorce papers, and an empty closet, and a wife who'd disappeared into the night like smoke. Adrian's phone lit up on the coffee table. A text from an unknown number. "This is Jennifer Cho, Mrs. Moretti's attorney. Confirming our meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. at my office. Address below. Please come alone." He stared at the message, then typed back, "I'll be there." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then returned. "Mr. Moretti, I want to be clear about something. My client wants a clean, quick dissolution. She's not interested in negotiation or reconciliation. She's not interested in hearing from you directly. If you're coming to this meeting with any agenda other than finalizing the divorce, please save us both time and don't come." Adrian's jaw clenched. He typed, "I understand." But he didn't understand, not really. How did 15 years of marriage just end? How did you wake up one morning and decide the person you'd built a life with was someone you needed to escape from? Except Isabella hadn't decided it in one morning. That was the part Adrian was beginning to comprehend. She'd decided it slowly, over months, maybe years, of disappointments and absences and betrayals both large and small. While he'd been busy not noticing, she'd been busy planning her exit. The realization settled in his chest like a stone. Around 3 in the morning, Adrian finally drifted into a restless sleep, the kind where dreams and reality blurred together. He dreamed of Isabella painting their first apartment, but when he looked closer, she wasn't painting walls. She was painting herself out of the picture, stroke by stroke, until nothing remained but blank canvas. He woke at dawn with a headache and the kind of bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The city was already stirring outside his windows, millions of people beginning their days, moving forward while Adrian felt frozen in place. He showered, shaved, and dressed in one of his usual suits, armor for a meeting he was dreading. As he knotted his tie, he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized himself. Same face, same features, but something fundamental had shifted. He looked like a man who'd just discovered he'd been living someone else's life. At 9:30, Marco texted, "Want me to come with you?" Adrian responded, "Attorney said to come alone. I meant for moral support, not as backup." "I'll be fine." "Boss, nobody's fine at their own divorce negotiation." Adrian pocketed his phone without responding and headed down to the garage. His driver was waiting, but Adrian waved him off. "I'll drive myself today." The Mercedes felt too large, too ostentatious as he navigated through morning traffic toward the address Jennifer Cho had provided. Her office was in a modest building in the Flatiron district. Nice enough, but nothing like the gleaming towers where Adrian conducted his business. It felt deliberate, like Isabella was making a point. This wasn't his world. This was hers. He found parking 3 blocks away and walked, using the time to steady his breathing and prepare himself for whatever was coming. A group of construction workers catcalled at a woman passing by, and Adrian found himself thinking about the boy he'd been at 17, the one who'd worked construction to help his mother pay rent, who'd left generous tips because he understood what it meant to work hard for little money. When had he stopped being that person? Jennifer Cho's office was on the fourth floor. The elevator was old, slow, and smelled faintly of cleaning products. Adrian rode it up alone, watching the numbers tick past and feeling like he was ascending toward his own execution. The reception area was simple: clean lines, comfortable chairs, a few pieces of art on the walls that looked original rather than mass-produced. A young woman sat behind the desk, and she looked up as Adrian entered. "Mr. Moretti?" "Yes." "Miss Cho is expecting you. Conference room is the second door on the left." Adrian walked down a short hallway, his footsteps muffled by carpet that had seen better days. He could hear voices behind the conference room door, two women talking in low tones. One of them was probably Jennifer Cho. The other might be Isabella. His hand hesitated on the doorknob. Part of him wanted to burst in, to see her, to make her look at him and explain how they'd arrived at this point. But Marco's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes you gotta let yourself feel like shit before you can think straight. Adrian knocked. "Come in." He opened the door to find two women seated at a simple conference table. The first was clearly Jennifer Cho, early 40s, sharp suit, intelligent eyes that assessed him immediately. The second was not Isabella, and Adrian felt a confusing mixture of relief and disappointment. "Mr. Moretti, I'm Jennifer Cho. This is my associate, Sarah Chen. Please sit." Adrian took the chair across from them, hyper-aware of every sound: the scrape of the chair legs, his own breathing, the hum of the air conditioning. "Your attorney isn't joining us?" Jennifer asked. "I was told to come alone. I assumed that meant without legal counsel." "It meant without an entourage. Theodore Wainwright is welcome to attend, though I suspect this meeting will be brief enough that his presence isn't necessary." Jennifer opened a folder in front of her. "My client has made her wishes very clear. She wants a simple, uncontested divorce. No alimony, no division of marital assets. She's willing to sign a document stating that she came into the marriage with approximately $15,000 in personal savings and a 2003 Honda Civic, and she's leaving with the equivalent value plus her personal earnings from freelance work over the years, approximately $80,000 total, which she's already transferred from your joint account to her personal account. Everything else remains yours." Adrian stared at her. "That's it?" "That's it. She wants nothing from you except her freedom and her maiden name back." "She's going back to Russo?" The name felt strange on his tongue. Isabella Russo, the girl he'd met at a coffee shop in Brooklyn when they were both 25 and stupid with hope. "Yes, the legal paperwork is already prepared. All we need is your signature acknowledging receipt of the divorce petition and your agreement not to contest the terms." "And if I want to contest them?" Jennifer's expression didn't change. "Then we'll see you in court, and this process becomes lengthy, expensive, and public. Is that what you want, Mr. Moretti?" "No?" The word came out before Adrian could think about it. "No, I don't want that." "Then sign the documents. You have 30 days to change your mind, but I'm advising you now. My client has no interest in reconciliation or negotiation. She's made her decision." Adrian looked at the papers Jennifer pushed across the table. Official forms with legal language that reduced 15 years of marriage to a series of checkboxes and signature lines. He pulled out his pen, a Mont Blanc Isabella had given him for their 10th anniversary, engraved with his initials. "Before I sign, can I ask you something?" "That depends on what you want to ask." "Is she okay?" "Isabella, is she safe? Happy?" Jennifer exchanged a glance with her associate. "I can't discuss my client's personal circumstances with you. I'm not asking for her address or phone number. I just want to know if she's okay." "Why do you care, Mr. Moretti?" Jennifer's voice had an edge to it now. "You didn't seem to care much about her well-being when you were spending your nights with other women." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "How did you—" "My client is thorough. She documented everything. Dates, times, credit card receipts, hotel reservations. She could have used that information to destroy you in court, to take half of everything you own. Instead, she chose to walk away clean. So again, I'll ask, why do you care now?" Adrian set down his pen. "Because I'm starting to realize what I lost. And I know I have no right to ask, no right to even wonder, but I need to know that she's okay. That she's not just surviving, but actually living. Because if she is, then maybe this wasn't all for nothing." The room fell silent. Sarah Chen, who hadn't spoken yet, was looking at him with something that might have been sympathy. Jennifer's expression remained professionally neutral, but something in her posture softened slightly. "She's okay," Jennifer said finally. "That's all I can tell you. She's okay, and she's moving forward." "Thank you." Adrian picked up the pen again and signed each document where indicated, his signature bold and decisive. The same signature that had built an empire and now was dismantling a marriage. When he finished, he pushed the papers back across the table. "What happens now?" "Now you wait. The state requires a 6-month waiting period from the date of filing. During that time, if both parties remain in agreement, the divorce will be finalized. If either party contests or if complications arise, it takes longer." "And Isabella? Will she have to appear in court?" "Not if you don't contest. This can all be handled through legal counsel." Jennifer gathered the signed documents. "Is there anything else, Mr. Moretti?" Adrian started to shake his head, then stopped. "Can you give her a message?" "That's not advisable. Please, just tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I signed the papers because I want her to be free. And tell her I hope she finds everything she's looking for." Jennifer studied him for a long moment. "I'll consider it. But, Mr. Moretti, if you really want to make amends, the best thing you can do is leave her alone. Let her build her new life without you in it. Can you do that?" Could he? Adrian thought about Isabella painting their first apartment, Isabella laughing over Chinese takeout, Isabella sitting in the dark waiting for him to come home from a birthday dinner he'd missed. Isabella becoming a ghost in her own life while he stopped noticing she was even there. "Yes," he said. "I can do that." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Cho, thank you for representing her. She deserves someone in her corner." Outside, the morning had turned bright and warm, the kind of October day that made New York feel like the center of the universe. Adrian walked the 3 blocks back to his car, his mind strangely empty. He'd expected to feel something, anger, grief, relief, but instead there was just a hollow numbness. His phone rang. Marco. "How'd it go?" "I signed the papers." "Just like that?" "Just like that. She doesn't want anything from me. Not money, not property, nothing. Just her freedom." Marco was quiet for a beat. "How you holding up?" "I don't know. I keep waiting for it to hit me, but I just feel nothing." "That's shock, boss. It'll hit eventually." "Where are you now?" "Standing on 23rd Street next to my car, having an existential crisis." "You?" "Office. We got a problem with the shipment from Newark. Customs is asking questions. I need you to make some calls." "Business." "Right. The empire that required constant attention, constant maintenance, constant vigilance." Adrian looked at his Mercedes, then at the subway entrance across the street. "Tell them I'll call tomorrow. I'm taking the rest of the day." "You're what?" "Taking the day. You handle the Newark situation, use the usual contacts, and if that doesn't work, call Romano. He owes us a favor." "Boss, are you sure you're okay? You never take days." "I'm not okay, Marco. But I'm going to try to figure out how to be." Adrian ended the call before Marco could argue. He walked past his car and descended into the subway, something he hadn't done in years. The platform was crowded with people heading to lunch meetings and appointments, everyone absorbed in their phones or their thoughts. Adrian bought a MetroCard from a machine that took 3 tries to accept his credit card, then stood on the platform waiting for the train. When was the last time he'd ridden the subway? Before the money, certainly. Back when he and Isabella were young and broke and rode the train everywhere because they couldn't afford anything else. They'd had a game, making up stories about the other passengers. That old woman with the shopping bags was actually a retired spy. That businessman with the briefcase was running from the mob. That young couple holding hands was eloping to Vegas. The train arrived with a screech of brakes. Adrian stepped on and found a seat between a teenager with headphones and a middle-aged woman reading a romance novel. The subway lurched forward, carrying him downtown toward nowhere in particular. He got off at Brooklyn Bridge City Hall on impulse, drawn by muscle memory to a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. The streets were both familiar and foreign, gentrified now, filled with expensive cafes and boutiques where there used to be bodegas and check-cashing places. But some things remained. Adrian walked until he found it, the coffee shop where he'd met Isabella 15 years ago. It had a different name now, different owners, but the building was the same. He could still picture her sitting at the corner table by the window, reading a book about impressionist painters, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold beside her. He'd been meeting a contact about a construction job, legitimate work he was using to build capital for less legitimate ventures. The meeting had fallen through, and Adrian had been sitting there angry and restless when Isabella had looked up from her book and caught him staring. "Can I help you?" she'd asked, not flirtatiously, just curious. "Sorry, you just look really focused. Must be a good book." She'd glanced at the cover, then back at him. "It's about Monet. Do you know his work?" Adrian had known nothing about art. "Can't say I do." He painted the same haystacks over and over, at different times of day and different light. People thought he was crazy, but he was trying to capture something that kept changing, the way perception shifts based on context. She'd smiled. "I think that's beautiful, the idea that nothing is ever really the same twice." They'd talked for 3 hours. By the time they left, Adrian had her number and a feeling in his chest that he'd later recognize as the beginning of love. Now he stood outside that same coffee shop, looking through the window at strangers living their own stories, and wondered how many moments like that one he'd taken for granted. How many times had Isabella tried to share something she loved with him, only to be met with distraction or dismissal? "Excuse me, are you going in?" Adrian stepped aside to let a young couple pass. They were holding hands, laughing about something, completely absorbed in each other. He watched them enter the coffee shop and felt a sharp pang of recognition. That had been him and Isabella once, young and hopeful and certain they could build something that would last. They had built something, just not what either of them expected. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Adrian Michael Moretti, if you don't call me back in the next hour, I'm coming to the penthouse." He should call her, explain the situation, deal with her questions and her opinions and her inevitable disappointment that her son's marriage had failed. But Adrian couldn't face that conversation yet. Instead, he started walking. He walked through Brooklyn Heights, past brownstones that cost millions and parks where mothers pushed strollers. He walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, joining tourists taking selfies and locals hustling to work. He walked until his feet hurt and his suit felt too heavy, and the sun started its descent toward the Hudson River. Somewhere around Tribeca, he found himself standing outside a small art gallery. The window display featured abstract paintings, bold colors, and sweeping gestures that reminded him of the way Isabella used to paint in their first apartment. She'd given it up eventually, claimed she didn't have time between the charity work and the social obligations that came with being Mrs. Adrian Moretti. But Adrian knew the truth now. She hadn't stopped painting because she was too busy. She'd stopped because somewhere along the way, he'd made her feel like her art didn't matter, like it was a hobby, not a calling, like she should be grateful for the life he'd provided instead of mourning the life she'd given up. A woman emerged from the gallery, locking the door behind her. She noticed Adrian staring through the window. "We're closed, but we open again at 10 tomorrow if you'd like to come back." "Those paintings," Adrian said. "Who's the artist?" "Local woman, Sarah Mitchell. She's incredibly talented. Are you interested in purchasing?" "No, He trailed off. What could he say? "I'm interested because they remind me of my wife who just left me." "They're beautiful." The woman smiled. "They are. Sarah says she paints what she feels, not what she sees. I think that's why they resonate with people." After she left, Adrian stood there a while longer, looking at paintings that captured something he couldn't name. Emotion made visible, feeling transformed into color and shape. The kind of thing Isabella used to try to explain to him while he nodded and pretended to understand. He hadn't understood. Not really. But standing here now, looking at these paintings in the fading light, Adrian thought he was beginning to. His phone rang. Not Marco this time. Theodore. "Jennifer Cho called. She said you signed the papers without any negotiation." "That's right." "Adrian, I have to advise against this. You're entitled to certain protections. The prenup we drew up." "There was no prenup, Theodore. I never asked her to sign one." "Then the marital assets are mine. She doesn't want them. She made that clear." Adrian started walking again, phone pressed to his ear. "Just process the paperwork. Make it as fast and clean as possible." "This isn't like you. Usually you fight for every advantage." "Maybe I'm tired of fighting." Adrian stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Maybe I'm tired of winning. Theodore sighed. All right, I'll handle it. But Adrian, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted. The light changed. Adrian stepped into the crosswalk with a dozen other pedestrians, all of them moving in different directions, all of them carrying their own stories and sorrows. The thing is, Theodore, I don't know what I wanted anymore. I thought I did. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. He ended the call and kept walking, through neighborhoods he'd claimed but never really known, past people whose lives intersected with his empire in ways he'd never considered, toward a future he couldn't see clearly anymore. By the time Adrian finally hailed a cab and gave the driver his address, it was nearly 8 o'clock. The city lights were coming on, transforming New York into the gleaming jewel that had seduced him as a young man hungry for more than survival. He'd conquered this city, built an empire from nothing, become the kind of man people feared and respected, and lost the only person who'd ever seen him as just Adrian, just a boy from Brooklyn trying to be better than his circumstances. The cab dropped him in front of his building. Adrian rode the elevator up, walked into his empty penthouse, and finally let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. Not what Isabella had done by leaving, what he had done by giving her reasons to go. He poured himself a scotch, then poured it down the sink. Drinking wouldn't change anything, wouldn't bring her back, wouldn't undo the months and years of neglect and betrayal. Instead, Adrian did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He sat down at the piano, put his fingers on the keys, and tried to remember the simple melody Isabella had once tried to teach him. His fingers stumbled, producing discordant notes that echoed through the empty penthouse. But he kept trying, kept searching for the music that had always been there. He'd just been too busy to hear it. Outside his windows, the city pulsed with life and light and endless possibility. Inside, Adrian Moretti sat alone, learning to play a song for a woman who was never coming back, and wondering if this was what Isabella had meant about learning to feel instead of just survive. The piano keys felt cold beneath his fingers, unfamiliar and unforgiving. Adrian pressed down again, trying to find the melody Isabella had shown him all those years ago, but the notes came out wrong, disjointed and harsh in the silence of the penthouse. He tried again, and again. Each attempt sounded worse than the last. Finally, he slammed the key cover down and walked away, his reflection catching in the darkened windows. A man alone in a luxury prison of his own making. His phone vibrated on the counter. Another text from his mother. I know you're avoiding me. I'm coming over tomorrow whether you like it or not. We need to talk about this. Adrian turned the phone face down and headed to the bedroom. The perfectly made bed still looked like a reproach, so he grabbed a pillow and blanket and returned to the couch. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams where Isabella was always just out of reach, turning corners before he could catch up, disappearing into crowds, her voice calling his name but growing fainter with each repetition. He woke to pounding on the door. Sunlight streamed through the windows, later than he'd slept in years. The pounding continued, insistent and familiar. Adrian Michael Moretti, I know you're in there. Open this door. His mother. Of course. Adrian dragged himself upright, ran a hand through his hair, and shuffled to the door. When he opened it, Elena Moretti stood in the hallway with 2 shopping bags and an expression that could cut glass. You look like hell, she announced, pushing past him into the penthouse. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't delivered in a cardboard box? Good morning to you too, Ma. Don't Ma me. I've been calling for 3 days. 3 days. I had to hear about your divorce from Maria Calabrese at the produce stand. Do you know how that felt? Having my son's personal business discussed over tomatoes? She set the shopping bags on the kitchen counter and started unpacking. Chicken, vegetables, pasta, olive oil. The ingredients for his childhood. Elena had raised 3 sons on her own after Adrian's father drank himself to death, working double shifts at a nursing home while somehow still managing to put homemade meals on the table every night. I'm sorry, Adrian said, and meant it. I should have called. Yes, you should have. Elena turned to face him, and Adrian saw that beneath her anger was something softer. Worry. Tell me what happened. The truth, not whatever sanitized version you're planning to give me. Adrian sank onto one of the bar stools. Isabella left me, filed for divorce. She's gone. I gathered that much from Maria. What I want to know is why. What did you do? Why do you assume I did something? Elena gave him a look that could have melted steel. Because I raised you, Adrian. I know exactly who you are. And Isabella, that girl was good. Too good for you, honestly. I told you that on your wedding day. You did not. I did. You were too happy to hear it. Elena started chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. So tell me, what did you do? The confession came easier than Adrian expected. Maybe because it was his mother, the one person who'd seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. Or maybe because he was too exhausted to maintain pretenses anymore. I had an affair, got careless. She found out months ago and didn't say anything. Just started planning her exit while I was too stupid to notice. Elena's knife paused mid-chop. An affair. Yeah. With who? Does it matter? It matters to me. I want to know what kind of woman was worth destroying your marriage over. No one worth it. That's the thing, Ma. She wasn't worth it. Nothing about it was worth it. I don't know. I got bored, complacent, started taking Isabella for granted. Elena set down the knife and crossed her arms. Your father did the same thing. Different woman every week. Thought I didn't know. The difference is I had 3 kids and no money and nowhere to go. Isabella had options. Smart girl. You're not going to tell me I should fight for her? Try to win her back? Why would I tell you that? You already lost her, Adrian. Fighting now would just be selfish. Elena returned to her chopping. The question is what you're going to do with that information. Are you going to learn from this? Or are you going to keep making the same mistakes until there's nothing left to lose? Adrian watched his mother work, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who'd cooked thousands of meals in countless kitchens. She'd given him everything, worked herself to the bone so he and his brothers could have better lives than she'd had. And what had he done with that sacrifice? Built an empire on violence and intimidation, married a woman who deserved better, then destroyed it all through sheer neglect. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted quietly. You can't fix it. That's what you're not understanding. Isabella made her choice. The only thing you can fix is yourself. Elena pointed the knife at him. And that starts with figuring out who you want to be. Not who you are now, who you want to be. Before Adrian could respond, his phone rang. Marco. I need to take this. Elena waved him off, already focused on the stove. What's going on? Adrian answered. We got a situation. Romano's crew hit one of our warehouses last night. Took about 200 grand in merchandise. Adrian's mind shifted into familiar patterns. Assess the threat, calculate the response, plan the retaliation. Romano, I thought we had an understanding. Apparently not anymore. Word is he thinks you're weak right now, distracted. Figured it was a good time to test your boundaries. The old Adrian would have already been planning Romano's punishment, would have made calls, mobilized soldiers, sent a message that would echo through every crew in the city. But standing in his mother's presence, smelling the sauce she was making from scratch, Adrian felt something shift. Set up a meeting, just Romano and me. No crew, no backup. Boss, that's not smart. Guy just robbed you. You can't walk in there alone. I'm not walking in alone. You'll be there, but no army. I want to talk to him, not start a war. And if he decides talking isn't enough, then we'll deal with that. But Marco, I'm tired of solving every problem with violence. Set up the meeting. After he hung up, Elena was watching him with an unreadable expression. What? That sounded different, more measured. Yeah, well, maybe I'm trying something new. Adrian slid onto the bar stool. You think that's weak? What you said about Romano thinking I'm weak right now? Elena stirred the sauce, tasting it before adding more salt. I think there's a difference between being weak and being smart. Your father, he thought strength meant never backing down, never compromising, never admitting when he was wrong. You know where that got him? Dead at 47 with nothing to show for his life except 3 kids who barely remember him and a wife who was relieved when he was gone. The words hung in the air, honest and brutal. Is that how Isabella felt? Relieved when she left? I don't know. But I know this. You keep going the way you're going, you'll end up just like him, powerful, feared, and completely alone. Elena turned to face him fully. Is that what you want? The question echoed in Adrian's mind long after his mother left, the penthouse filled with containers of homemade food and the lingering scent of her perfume. He stood at the window, looking out at the city he'd conquered, and wondered if his mother was right, if power without purpose was just another form of poverty. His phone buzzed. A message from Marco. Meeting set. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., Romano's Social Club in Red Hook. Just him, you, and me. Adrian typed back, good. And Marco, thank you. For what? For being honest when I need it. For giving a damn. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Finally. That's what family does, boss. But Marco wasn't family, not by blood anyway. He was something Adrian had chosen, the same way he'd chosen this life, this path, this empire. The same way he'd chosen to ignore his wife's slow disappearance. Choices. Everything came down to choices. Adrian spent the rest of the day doing something he'd never done before. Nothing. No meetings, no calls, no business that required his immediate attention. Instead, he sat on his couch eating his mother's cooking and reading through old text messages from Isabella. Most of them were logistical, reminders about events they needed to attend, questions about his schedule. But scattered among the mundane were glimpses of the woman he'd married. Saw the most beautiful painting today at the Whitney. Made me think of that sunrise in Montauk, remember? The one where we stayed up all night talking about everything and nothing? He didn't remember. Couldn't place the specific sunrise among the handful of trips they'd taken in 15 years. Found your grandmother's recipe for braciole. Want me to try making it for Sunday dinner? She had made it. He'd eaten it while taking calls about a shipment delay, barely tasting the food she'd spent hours preparing. I love you. Even when you're impossible. Especially when you're impossible. That one was from 3 years ago. Adrian searched for more recent messages with those 3 words and found nothing. At some point, Isabella had stopped saying she loved him, and he'd been too distracted to notice when. The next morning, Adrian woke early and did something else unusual. He went for a run. Not in the gym in his building, but outside through streets he usually only saw from the back of a car. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of coffee and exhaust and possibility. Other runners nodded at him as they passed, a silent acknowledgement of shared effort. By the time he returned to the penthouse, sweating and breathless, Adrian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness, exactly. More like presence. The feeling of being in his body, in this moment, instead of always racing 3 steps ahead to the next deal or threat or opportunity. He showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit, and headed out again. This time, he had a destination. The public library's main branch was magnificent in the morning light, its iconic lion standing guard over 5th Avenue. Adrian climbed the steps and entered a world he'd forgotten existed. Rows of books stretched in every direction. People sat reading, studying, existing in quiet contemplation. He found the art section and pulled books at random. Monet, Matisse, Rothko, O'Keeffe. Names Isabella had mentioned over the years, artists she'd loved, work she'd tried to share with him. Adrian settled into a chair and began reading. Hours passed. The light through the windows shifted from morning brightness to afternoon gold. Adrian absorbed information about color theory, brushwork, the way artists saw the world differently than other people. How they captured not just what something looked like, but what it felt like. Isabella had tried to teach him this, had tried to show him how to see beyond the surface of things, and he dismissed it as impractical, irrelevant to the business of building and maintaining power. Excuse me, we're closing in 15 minutes. Adrian looked up, startled. A librarian smiled apologetically at him. Of course. Thank you. He checked out 3 books, something else he hadn't done since college, and walked out into the early evening. The city was transitioning from day to night, office workers heading home, restaurants preparing for dinner service, the endless rhythm of New York carrying on indifferent to any individual's crisis. Adrian's phone rang as he walked. An unknown number. Hello? Mr. Moretti, this is Jennifer Cho. His heart jumped. Is Isabella okay? She's fine. I'm calling because she asked me to pass along a message. Adrian stopped walking, right there on 5th Avenue, people flowing around him like water around a stone. What message? She said to tell you thank you for signing the papers without fighting, for making this easier than it could have been. Jennifer paused. and she asked me to tell you that she hopes you find what you're looking for. The same words from her letter. Adrian closed his eyes. That's it? That's it, Mr. Moretti. I probably shouldn't say this, but my client spoke about you with more kindness than I expected. Whatever else happened between you, she doesn't hate you. She just couldn't stay. I know. I'm beginning to understand why. Good. That's good. Take care of yourself, Mr. Moretti. The call ended, leaving Adrian standing on a busy sidewalk holding library books about art and carrying the weight of his ex-wife's kindness like a stone in his chest. That night, he sat in the penthouse reading about Monet's Haystacks, the same series Isabella had told him about the day they met. How Monet had painted the same subject over and over, in different light, different seasons, different conditions. Not because he was obsessed with haystacks, but because he was obsessed with perception. With the way everything changes depending on how and when you look at it, Adrian thought about perception, about how he'd perceived his marriage as stable, his wife as content, his choices as justified, about how wrong he'd been on all counts. The next evening, he drove to Red Hook alone, leaving the Mercedes at home in favor of an older, less conspicuous sedan. Marco was already waiting outside Romano's social club when Adrian arrived, a squat brick building that had been standing since the neighborhood was actually run by longshoremen instead of hedge fund managers. You sure about this? Marco asked as Adrian approached. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Inside, the club smelled like cigars and old wood and the ghost of 1,000 deals, both legitimate and otherwise. Romano sat at a table in the back, flanked by two of his crew. He was older than Adrian, maybe 50, with the kind of face that had seen everything twice and been impressed by none of it. Moretti, heard you wanted to talk. Just us, Adrian said, gesturing to Romano's men. My guy waits outside, your guys wait outside. Romano studied him for a long moment, then nodded. His men left reluctantly. Marco followed, leaving Adrian and Romano alone in the dim room. You got balls, I'll give you that, Romano said. Coming here after I hit your warehouse. Most guys would have sent an army. I'm not most guys. That's what I'm counting on. Romano leaned back in his chair. Word is your wife left you. Word is you're distracted, making mistakes. I figured it was time to test that theory. And what did you learn? That you didn't retaliate, which either means you're weak or you're playing some kind of long game I don't understand yet. Adrian pulled out a chair and sat down across from Romano. Or it means I'm tired of the same old patterns. You hit me, I hit you back harder, you escalate, I escalate, and eventually people end up dead over 200 grand in merchandise that neither of us actually needs. So what are you saying? You're just going to let it go? I'm saying I want to propose something different. You keep the merchandise, consider it a loan. In exchange, you owe me a favor. Not now, not next week, but someday when I need something that doesn't involve violence or territory or any of the usual bullshit. Romano's eyes narrowed. What kind of favor? I don't know yet. Maybe I never collect. Maybe I just want to see if it's possible to do business differently in this city. You're serious? Completely. Romano poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle on the table. He slid one toward Adrian. You know what I think? I think your wife leaving broke something in you, made you soft. Adrian took the glass but didn't drink. Maybe, or maybe it woke me up to the fact that there are things more valuable than winning every fight. Like what? Like being able to look at yourself in the mirror, like building something that matters instead of just something that lasts. Adrian met Romano's gaze. Like not ending up alone at 50, surrounded by people who fear you but don't give a damn if you live or die. Romano flinched, just barely, but Adrian saw it. He'd struck a nerve. You think you're better than me? Romano asked, his voice quiet. No, I think we're exactly the same, and I think that's the problem. Adrian stood. Keep the merchandise. The offer stands. You owe me a favor, to be collected when and if I need it. And Romano, I'm not coming after you for this. But I'm also not going to forget it. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's handed to you. He walked out without waiting for an answer, Marco falling into step beside him as they exited the club. What the hell was that? Marco demanded once they were in the car. That was me trying something new. Boss, you just let Romano rob you and walk away. You know how that looks?
Like I'm weak? Like I'm broken? Good. Let them think that. While they're busy underestimating me, I'll be figuring out what actually matters. Marco stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Who are you and what did you do with Adrian Moretti? Same guy, just starting to see things differently. Adrian started the car. Isabella left because I became someone she couldn't recognize anymore.
Someone I couldn't recognize. Maybe it's time to figure out who I actually want to be instead of who I thought I needed to be. They drove back to Manhattan in silence, the city lights reflecting off the harbor like fallen stars. Adrian dropped Marco at his apartment in Murray Hill, then continued uptown to the penthouse. But instead of parking in the garage, he kept driving. Through Central Park, down the West Side Highway, across the Brooklyn Bridge. He ended up in the old neighborhood, the streets where he'd grown up, where he'd learned that the world was divided into those who took and those who got taken from. The apartment building where his mother had raised 3 boys in a 2-bedroom walk-up was still standing, though it had been renovated and gentrified like everything else. Adrian parked and got out, standing on the sidewalk where he'd stood 1,000 times as a kid. The bodega on the corner was now a organic juice bar. The check-cashing place was a yoga studio. But some things remained. The same street lamps, the same fire escapes, the same pavement where he'd learned to fight and scheme and survive. An old man sat on a stoop 3 buildings down, smoking a cigarette and watching the street. Adrian recognized him, Mr. Castellano, who'd lived in the neighborhood forever and knew everyone's business. "That you, Adrian Moretti?" the old man called out. Adrian walked over. "It's me, Mr. Castellano. How've you been?" Still breathing, which at my age is an accomplishment, he gestured at the building behind him. "Your mother still comes by sometimes, brings me food, makes sure I'm taking my pills. Good woman, your mother. The best. Heard about your marriage. Sorry about that." Word traveled fast, even in a neighborhood Adrian barely visited anymore. "Thank you. You know what your problem is, kid. You spent so long trying to escape this place, you forgot what made it worth escaping from in the first place." Mr. Castellano took a drag on his cigarette. "Being poor ain't noble, but neither is being rich if all you got to show for it is a big empty apartment and nobody to share it with." Sounds like you've been talking to my mother. Don't need to talk to Elena to see what's obvious. You built yourself an empire, but what's an empire without a queen? Just a lonely king in a castle made of money. Adrian sat down on the stoop beside the old man. "You think it's too late? To become someone different? Too late? Kid, you're what, 40-something? You got half your life ahead of you still. The question ain't whether it's too late. The question is whether you got the guts to actually change. 'Cause that's harder than building any empire. That takes real courage." They sat in silence for a while, watching the neighborhood transition from evening to night. A young couple walked by, arguing about something trivial. A teenager skateboarded past, headphones blocking out the world. Life continuing in its endless, ordinary way. "I don't know if I know how to be anything other than what I am," Adrian admitted. "Then you figure it out. One day at a time, one choice at a time. That's how anything worth doing gets done." "Mr." Castellano stubbed out his cigarette. "Your wife, she sounds like she figured it out. Had the courage to walk away from everything you built together because she knew it wasn't right anymore. That's strength, kid. Real strength." Adrian drove home with Mr. Castellano's words echoing in his mind. When he entered the penthouse, it felt different somehow, not quite as empty. Or maybe he was just learning to sit with the emptiness instead of running from it. He made coffee, something he usually left for Isabella or the housekeeper, and sat at the piano again. This time, instead of trying to remember the melody she'd taught him, he just pressed keys randomly, not making music exactly, just making sound, filling the silence with something other than his own thoughts. His phone buzzed with an email from Theodore. The subject line read, "Divorce Proceedings, Update." Adrian opened it and read quickly. The waiting period was progressing normally. Barring any complications, the divorce would be finalized in approximately 5 months. Everything was proceeding exactly as Isabella wanted, clean, quick, final. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt the weight of time collapsing. 5 months until it was officially over. 5 months to figure out who he wanted to be on the other side of this. Adrian closed the piano and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath him, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to map. Somewhere out there, Isabella was living one of those lives. Working, maybe. Painting again, hopefully. Building something new from the ruins of what they'd had together. He hoped she was happy. Genuinely hoped it, even though the thought of her happiness without him felt like swallowing glass. But maybe that was the point. Maybe love, real love, meant wanting someone's happiness even when it didn't include you. Maybe that's what he should have learned 15 years ago, instead of now, standing in an empty penthouse counting down the months until his marriage legally ceased to exist. Adrian pulled out his phone and opened a new message to Isabella's number. He typed, "I hope you're well. I hope you're painting again. I hope you found whatever you were looking for when you left." His thumb hovered over the send button. Then he deleted the message. Jennifer had been clear. Isabella didn't want to hear from him, didn't want his apologies or his hopes or his belated understanding. She wanted her freedom, and the only gift he had left to give her was respecting that wish. Adrian put his phone away and returned to the piano. He opened one of the library books, a collection of Monet's letters to friends and family, and started reading, learning about a man who dedicated his life to seeing the world differently, to capturing light and moment and the way perception shifted with every passing second. Outside, the city glowed in the darkness. Inside, Adrian Moretti sat alone, learning to see what had been there all along, and wondering if it was possible to paint over a life you'd already ruined, or if some mistakes were permanent as dried oil on canvas. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, one Adrian had never experienced before. He woke early, not because business demanded it, but because sleep had become elusive, his mind too active with thoughts he'd spent years avoiding. He ran through the city streets as dawn broke, his breath visible in the November air, watching New York wake up around him. Then coffee, real coffee he made himself, and hours spent reading at the kitchen counter Isabella had chosen, books about art and philosophy, and subjects he'd once dismissed as impractical. His empire didn't collapse. That surprised him most of all. The meetings still happened, the deals still closed, the money still flowed. But Adrian delegated more, trusted Marco and his other lieutenants to handle situations he would have once insisted on controlling personally. And strangely, things ran smoother. Turned out his constant micromanaging had been creating more problems than it solved. "You're different," Marco said one afternoon in mid-November, sitting across from Adrian in the office conference room. They just finalized a shipping contract that would have taken weeks of tense negotiation a year ago, but Adrian had simply accepted reasonable terms instead of fighting for marginal advantages. "Different how?" "Calmer. Like you're not trying to win every conversation anymore." Marco tilted his head, studying Adrian with the frankness of old friendship. "It's weird, but not bad weird. I'm trying to figure out what actually matters. Turns out most of what we fight about doesn't. And the stuff that does matter?" Adrian thought about Isabella's empty closet, the divorce papers progressing through legal channels, the silence of the penthouse at night. "I'm still figuring that out." His mother visited twice a week now, always with food and opinions in equal measure. She'd stopped asking about the divorce directly, instead watching Adrian with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "You're reading," she observed one evening, noting the stack of library books on the counter. She picked one up, a biography of Georgia O'Keeffe. "Since when do you read about artists?" "Since I realized I should have been paying attention when Isabella tried to teach me." Adrian took the book from her and set it back on the stack. She loved O'Keeffe, said she painted the world the way it felt, not the way it looked. Elena's expression softened. "You're mourning her. That's good. You should mourn what you lost. What if I'm mourning the wrong thing? What if I'm not mourning her so much as mourning the version of myself I thought I was?" Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe losing her was the only way you could see who you'd become. Elena started unpacking groceries. She never arrived empty-handed. Your father never had that moment, never woke up and realized what he'd destroyed. You have a chance he never had, Adrian. Don't waste it. But what was he supposed to do with this awareness? Adrian asked himself that question daily, usually while staring out at the city from his two large windows, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. The answer arrived unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon in early December. Adrian was walking through Soho, ostensibly heading to meet a contractor about property renovations, when he passed a small storefront with a hand-painted sign, Community Art Center, classes for all ages. Through the window, he could see a group of teenagers working on canvases, their faces intense with concentration. An instructor moved between them, offering guidance and encouragement. Something about the scene stopped Adrian in his tracks. He stood on the sidewalk, watching these kids create something from nothing, and remembered Isabella talking about the art program she'd wanted to fund at her old high school. He'd written the check, $50,000, that meant nothing to him, and then promptly forgot about it, too busy with more important matters to attend the opening or see what his money had built. When was that? 3 years ago? 4? Adrian pulled out his phone and scrolled through old emails until he found it. The Russo Arts Initiative at Brooklyn Technical High School. Named for Isabella's family, funded by Adrian's money, forgotten by them both in the chaos of their disintegrating marriage. He changed direction, heading for the subway instead of the meeting. The contractor could wait. This couldn't. The train took him to Brooklyn, to a neighborhood he barely knew, to a school he'd never visited despite funding a program there. The building was massive, institutional, filled with the sounds of teenagers being loudly, messily alive. Adrian found the main office and asked for directions to the art wing. "You here to pick up a student?" the secretary asked, eyeing his expensive coat with mild suspicion. "No, I funded the arts program a few years ago. I wanted to see it." Her expression transformed. "You're Mr. Moretti? Oh my goodness, please, let me get Mrs. Chen. She runs the program. She'll want to meet you." Before Adrian could protest, he was being ushered down hallways covered in student artwork, through doors marked Authorized Personnel Only, into a bright studio space that smelled like paint and possibility. 20 or so students worked at easels and tables, some painting, some sculpting, all completely absorbed in their work. A woman in her 50s approached, wiping clay from her hands. "Mr. Moretti? I'm Grace Chen. This is such a surprise. We had no idea you were coming. I should have called. I was nearby and thought I'd see how the program was doing. It's thriving, absolutely thriving. Come, let me show you." Grace guided him through the space, pointing out equipment and supplies, introducing students who barely looked up from their work. "We serve about 100 students now across all grades. Some of them are incredibly talented, but most importantly, they're all finding a way to express themselves. For a lot of these kids, this is the only place they feel truly seen." Adrian stopped in front of a canvas where a girl of maybe 16 was painting a cityscape in bold, almost violent strokes. It reminded him of Isabella's early work, the pieces she'd created in their first apartment before life and marriage had smoothed away her edges. "That's beautiful," he said. The girl glanced up, surprised. "Thanks. It's supposed to be angry. Like, the city is beautiful, but it's also kind of crushing everyone in it, you know?" "I know exactly what you mean." Grace pulled Adrian aside as they continued the tour. "I have to tell you, this program literally saved some of these kids. We've had students get full scholarships to art school. But more than that, we've had students who were failing other classes start to succeed because they finally had something they cared about. Your donation didn't just buy art supplies, Mr. Moretti. It bought hope." The words hit Adrian harder than he expected. He'd written that check to make Isabella happy, to maintain the appearance of being a good husband, a philanthropic businessman. He'd never considered the actual impact, the actual lives changed by money that meant nothing to him. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said. "Do you have room for more students, more programs?" "Always. We could triple our size if we had the funding. There's a waiting list of kids who want in, but we just don't have the resources." "What would it take?" "To triple the size, offer more classes, hire more teachers." Grace named a figure that made Adrian laugh. Not because it was large, but because it was so small. He spent more than that on suits in a year. He'd lost more than that in a single poker game. And here was a program that could change hundreds of lives, starving for an amount of money he'd barely noticed spending. "I'll have my accountant contact you by the end of the week," Adrian said. "Let's make it happen." Grace's eyes widened. "Mr. Moretti, that's incredibly generous, but you don't have to decide right now. Take some time to think about. I've thought about it. I've been thinking about it for 3 years without realizing it." Adrian looked around the studio, at kids creating and dreaming and becoming. "My wife, ex-wife. She understood something I didn't. That money isn't worth anything unless you do something meaningful with it. I'm just sorry it took me this long to figure that out. He left the school with Grace's gratitude ringing in his ears and a strange lightness in his chest. On the subway ride back to Manhattan, he pulled out his phone and started making notes. The construction business could fund more programs like this. The investment properties could establish scholarships. The money he'd spent maintaining an image could instead maintain opportunities for kids who needed them. Marco called as Adrian emerged from the subway. "Where are you? You missed the meeting with the contractor." "Brooklyn. I'll reschedule with him." "Brooklyn? What's in Brooklyn?" "A program Isabella cared about. One I'm going to actually pay attention to this time." Adrian flagged down a cab. "Marco, I want you to look into our charitable giving. What we donate, where it goes, what kind of impact we're actually making." "Since when do you care about charitable giving?" "Since today. Since I realized I've been using it as a tax write-off instead of actually trying to help anyone. Pull together a report. I want to see everything." There was a pause on the line. "Boss, are you feeling okay? You sound different. I know. Get used to it, too." That night, Adrian sat at the piano and actually managed to play the simple melody Isabella had taught him years ago. His fingers stumbled occasionally, but the basic tune emerged, recognizable, if not perfect. It wasn't much, but it was progress. His phone rang. An unknown number, but Adrian recognized the area code. Hartford, where Isabella's sister lived. His heart jumped. "Hello? Mr. Moretti? This is Angela Russo, Isabella's sister. Is she okay?" The question came automatically, panic rising in his throat. "She's fine. I'm calling because she doesn't know I'm calling, and she'd probably kill me if she found out." Angela sighed. "Look, I don't like you. I think you treated my sister terribly, and I'm glad she left. But I also know she's still struggling with it, and I thought you should know that." "What do you mean, struggling?" "I mean, she puts on a good face, but I can tell she's hurting. She left everything behind, Mr. Moretti. Not just you, her whole life in New York, the friends she made through your business, the charities she worked with. She's starting over from scratch, and it's harder than she expected." Adrian gripped the phone tighter. "Where is she? Is she with you?" "No, and I'm not telling you where she is. That's not why I called. I called because—" Angela hesitated. "Because she mentioned that you signed the divorce papers without fighting, that you made the whole process easier than she expected. And I wanted to say thank you for that. It's the least you could do after everything, but still. Thank you." "I want her to be happy, Angela. I know I have no right to want that, no right to care at this point, but I do. If there's anything I can do, there's nothing. The best thing you can do is leave her alone and let her heal." Angela's voice softened slightly. "But for what it's worth, the fact that you're asking says something. I don't know what exactly, but something." After she hung up, Adrian sat in the darkened penthouse, Angela's words echoing in his mind. Isabella was struggling, starting over, building a new life from pieces he'd helped destroy, and there was nothing he could do about it except exactly what he was doing, staying away, giving her space, letting her breathe. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, harder than building an empire from nothing, harder than facing down rivals and threats. Because every instinct he had screamed at him to fix this, to find her, to make it right somehow. But love, real love, meant accepting that sometimes the best thing you could do was nothing at all. December passed in a blur of activity. Adrian threw himself into the charitable work with the same intensity he'd once reserved for business deals. He visited schools, community centers, youth programs. He wrote checks. But more importantly, he showed up. Learned names, asked questions, actually listened to the answers. "You're spending a lot of time on this," Marco observed one afternoon, reviewing financials in Adrian's office. "The donations are starting to impact our bottom line." "Good. We have more money than we know what to do with anyway." Adrian signed off on another grant proposal. "Besides, this is the first thing I've done in years that actually feels like it matters. What about the business? What about building the empire?" Adrian leaned back in his chair looking at Marco, this man who'd been loyal through everything, who'd become more brother than employee. "What's the point of an empire if all it does is make you rich and alone? I'd rather build something that outlasts me, Something that actually helps people instead of just helping myself. Christmas approached with its usual Manhattan fanfare. The city decorated itself in lights in excess, store windows competing for most extravagant display, tourists flooding the streets with cameras and wonder. Adrian had always loved this time of year. The parties, the deals made over expensive dinners, the sense of being at the center of something important. This year, it all felt hollow. He spent Christmas Eve at his mother's apartment in Queens along with his brothers and their families. The apartment was too small for everyone, but that was part of its charm. The forced closeness, the noise, the chaos of children and conversation, and his mother's cooking filling every corner. "Where's Isabella?" his youngest nephew asked, looking around as if she might be hiding somewhere. "Is Auntie Isabella coming?" The room went quiet. Adrian's brother shot the kid a warning look, but the damage was done. "Auntie Isabella isn't coming this year," Adrian said carefully. "She's celebrating with her own family." "But you're her family too." "Not anymore, buddy. Sometimes people's families change." Later, after the presents were opened and the kids were running wild on sugar and excitement, Adrian's mother found him on the small balcony, looking out at the Queen's skyline. "You okay?" "Yeah, just needed some air." Elena stood beside him, bundled in a sweater against the December cold. "She's not coming back, you know. Even if the divorce falls through, even if you change everything about yourself, she's not coming back." "I know." "So what are you doing all this for? The charity work, the soul searching, the reading art books in the middle of the night?" Adrian thought about the question. What was he doing it for? "For me, because I don't want to be the person I was anymore. Because I want to look in the mirror and recognize who's looking back." "Good answer." Elena patted his arm. "Come inside. Your brother wants to challenge you to cards, and you know how pouty he gets when you say no." The new year arrived with the usual celebrations. Adrian spent it alone in the penthouse, watching fireworks over the harbor through his windows, thinking about resolutions and redemption, and whether either was really possible for someone who'd burned as many bridges as he had. His phone buzzed at midnight, a text from Marco. "Happy New Year, boss. Here's to better choices." Adrian typed back, "Two better choices." And Marco, "Thank you for sticking around while I figure out what those are." In January, Theodore called with an update. 4 months until the divorce is finalized. Everything's proceeding smoothly. Jennifer Cho says her client is satisfied with how things are progressing. That's good. Adrian, I have to ask, are you sure you don't want to try to contact her? Make one last attempt at reconciliation? The court would allow it. I'm sure. She asked to be left alone. I'm respecting that. Even though you still love her. Adrian hadn't said that, but Theodore had known him long enough to read between the lines. Especially because I still love her. She deserves peace. Not another person making demands on her time and emotion. You've changed, Theodore said. I've known you for 10 years, and you've changed more in the last 6 months than in all that time combined. Is that a good thing? I don't know yet. Ask me in another 6 months. February brought bitter cold and the kind of gray skies that made even Manhattan look depressed. Adrian continued his routine, running, reading, working on programs that actually mattered instead of just deals that made money. He learned to cook basic meals from YouTube videos, not because he couldn't afford to eat out every night, but because he wanted to understand the satisfaction Isabella had found in creating something with her own hands. He wasn't good at it. His first attempt at pasta resulted in something that resembled rubber bands. His chicken came out simultaneously burnt and raw, a feat he hadn't known was possible. But he kept trying, the same way he kept trying to play the piano, the same way he kept trying to become someone worthy of the second chance he'd already lost. On a Thursday in late February, Marco came into Adrian's office with an unusual expression. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just, Romano called, wants to meet. Adrian's guard went up automatically. What does he want? To talk. Says he has a proposition. And boss? He specifically mentioned that night at his club. Said he's been thinking about what you said. They met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in the village, public enough to be safe, quiet enough to have a real conversation. Romano looked older than Adrian remembered, more tired. Thanks for coming, Romano said as Adrian sat down. I wasn't sure you would. You asked. I'm here. What's this about? Romano stirred his coffee, not meeting Adrian's eyes. Remember what you said? About favors and doing business differently? I thought you were full of shit. Thought you were playing some angle I couldn't see. And now? Now I'm not so sure. I've been watching you, Moretti. Heard about the school programs, the community centers, the money you're throwing at kids who got nothing. That's not an angle. That's something else. It's trying to matter, trying to build something that lasts beyond fear and power. Romano nodded slowly. My daughter, she's 17, wants to go to art school. I told her it was a waste of time, that she should study something practical. We had a huge fight about it, and she hasn't spoken to me in weeks. He finally looked up at Adrian. Then I heard about what you're doing at that school in Brooklyn, and I thought, maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things. What are you asking me, Romano? I'm asking if that favor I owe you, if I can use it now, to get my daughter into your program, to show her that her old man isn't completely stuck in his ways, to maybe fix something before it's too late to fix. Adrian thought about Isabella's empty closet, the divorce papers progressing toward finality, all the moments he'd missed because he was too stubborn to see what mattered. You don't need to use the favor for that. Just have her apply through normal channels. If she's serious about art, the program will take her. That's it? No strings? No strings. But Romano, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't wait until she's gone to realize you should have been listening. Talk to her. Actually talk to her. It might feel awkward or uncomfortable, but it's better than the alternative. After Romano left, Adrian sat alone in the coffee shop, watching people come and go, everyone carrying their own stories of love and loss and learning too late. He pulled out his phone and looked at the last photo he had of Isabella, from 2 years ago at some charity gala, her smile beautiful and empty in equal measure. He'd been so blind, so focused on building and conquering and winning that he'd missed her slow disappearance right in front of him. And now she was gone, truly gone, living a life he'd never be part of. But maybe that was okay. Maybe her freedom was worth his regret. Maybe love, at its core, meant wanting someone's happiness even when it carved you hollow to imagine it without you. Adrian deleted the photo. Not to forget her, he'd never forget her, but to stop holding on to something that had only ever been an illusion. The woman in that photo had already been lost to him, had already been planning her escape while he'd been too arrogant to notice. The real Isabella, the one who painted and dreamed and deserved better than he'd given her, was somewhere else now, breathing free, and that had to be enough. March arrived with the promise of spring, though New York was still caught between seasons, unable to commit to warmth. Adrian marked off another month on the mental calendar he kept. 3 months until the divorce was final. 3 months until 15 years of marriage officially became a footnote in both their histories. He wondered sometimes if Isabella thought about him, if she ever drove past a building they'd attended events in, or heard a song that had played at their wedding, or saw something that reminded her of who they'd been before everything went wrong. He hoped she didn't, hoped she was too busy building her new life to spare thoughts for the old one. But late at night, when the penthouse was dark and silent, and his own thoughts were his only company, Adrian let himself remember. Not the end, he'd relived that enough. But the beginning, the middle, the good parts that had gotten buried under ambition and neglect, and the slow accumulation of 1,000 small betrayals. He remembered Isabella laughing at his terrible jokes. Isabella painting their first apartment with such joy it transformed cheap walls into something that felt like home. Isabella holding his hand through his mother's surgery, steady and strong when he was falling apart. Isabella believing in him when he was just a kid from Brooklyn with more ambition than sense. She'd loved him once. Truly, completely loved him. And he'd taken that love and slowly, carelessly destroyed it, too focused on becoming powerful to notice he was losing everything that made power worth having. But he was different now. That's what he told himself in those dark hours. Not better, necessarily. Not redeemed, but different. Trying, learning, becoming someone who might someday be worthy of the second chance he'd already squandered. The city lights glowed beyond his windows, eternal and indifferent. And Adrian Moretti sat alone in his empire of silence, learning to live with the consequences of choices he could never undo. The call from Theodore came on a Tuesday morning in late May, exactly 2 years after Isabella had signed the divorce papers. Adrian was at the community center in Red Hook, watching a group of teenagers practice a mural design for the neighborhood, when his phone buzzed. "It's done," Theodore said without preamble. "The divorce is finalized. You're officially no longer married to Isabella Russo. Adrian stepped outside into the spring sunshine, the sounds of the city washing over him. That's it? No ceremony, no final paperwork? That's it. The court processed everything this morning. I'll have the final document sent to your office, but legally, you're both free. Free? The word should have brought relief. Instead, it settled in Adrian's chest like a stone. Thank you, Theodore, for handling everything. Adrian, are you okay? Yeah, I think I am, actually. And surprisingly, he meant it. The past 2 years had been the hardest of his life. Harder than building his empire, harder than surviving his father's violence, harder than any threat he'd ever faced. But somewhere in the process of losing everything, he'd found something he hadn't known he was missing: himself. Or at least a version of himself he didn't hate looking at in the mirror. He returned to the community center and spent the rest of the afternoon with the kids, offering feedback on their designs, listening to their stories, being present in a way he'd never managed when it actually mattered. When he finally left, the sun was setting over the harbor, painting the city in shades of gold and rose. His phone rang as he walked to his car. Marco. Hey, you got a minute? Always. What's up? I'm at Romano's place. You need to get here. Now. The urgency in Marco's voice kicked Adrian's instincts into overdrive. What happened? Just come. I'll explain when you get here. Adrian drove to Romano's social club in Red Hook, his mind running through possibilities. A setup? Retaliation for something Adrian had missed? He'd been so focused on changing himself that he'd maybe grown careless about watching his back. But when he arrived, there was no ambush waiting. Just Marco standing outside with Romano, both men looking uncomfortable. What's going on? Adrian asked, stepping out of the car. Romano spoke first. I need to tell you something about your wife, your ex-wife. I know where she is. Everything stopped. The street noise, the harbor sounds, Adrian's own breathing. What? My daughter, the one you helped get into that art program. She goes to school in Providence now, Rhode Island School of Design, and there's a woman who works at a gallery near campus. She teaches classes there sometimes, helps students with their portfolios. Romano met Adrian's eyes. It's Isabella. I saw her when I was visiting my daughter last month. I'm sure it was her. Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs. You're certain? Positive. My daughter confirmed it. Says everyone at school knows about the gallery owner who used to live in New York, married to some big shot, walked away from everything to paint again. They think she's incredibly brave. Why are you telling me this? Adrian's voice came out rougher than he intended. You know I'm not supposed to contact her. She made that clear. I know. But I also know what you did for my daughter, for me. And I figured you had a right to know that she's okay. More than okay, actually. She seems happy. Happy. The word Adrian had been hoping for, dreading, needing to hear. Isabella was happy. Without him. Because of leaving him. Thank you for telling me, Adrian managed. But I can't. I won't go see her. That's not what she wants. Marco stepped forward. Boss, are you sure? This might be your only chance to what? Disrupt her life again? Make her feel unsafe in the one place she's built for herself? Adrian shook his head. No, she chose freedom. I'm not taking that away from her. He drove home in a daze, Romano's words echoing in his mind. Isabella in Providence. Teaching art, working at a gallery, living the life she'd always wanted before Adrian had convinced her that being Mrs. Moretti was enough. That night, Adrian did something he hadn't allowed himself in 2 years. He looked her up online. There were no social media profiles. Isabella had always been private, and apparently she'd stayed that way. But he found the gallery Romano mentioned, Russo Fine Arts. The name alone made Adrian smile through the ache in his chest. She'd reclaimed her maiden name, her identity, her whole self. The gallery's website showed upcoming exhibitions, art classes, a statement about supporting emerging artists and making art accessible to everyone. It sounded exactly like something Isabella would create. Beautiful, meaningful, generous. There were no photos of her on the site, just images of artwork and the gallery space, a small, bright room with white walls and good lighting. But Adrian could picture her there perfectly. Isabella in her element, surrounded by art and artists, finally breathing free. He closed his laptop and sat in the darkness of the penthouse, wrestling with temptation. Providence was 2 hours away. He could be there by midnight, could stand outside her gallery just to see it, could maybe catch a glimpse of her from a distance just to confirm she was really okay. But he didn't, because that wasn't about her well-being. It was about his own need, his own inability to let go completely. And Isabella deserved better than a man who couldn't respect her boundaries even after everything he'd put her through. Instead, Adrian opened his laptop again and navigated to the gallery's website. There was a donation button, contributions to support art education programs and scholarships for low-income students. He clicked it and entered an amount that would fund the program for years. Then he paused at the name field. He could put his own name, make sure she knew he was supporting her work, that he'd changed, that he was trying to be better. But that would be just another way of inserting himself into her life, demanding recognition for doing what he should have done from the beginning. Adrian typed in anonymous donor and hit submit. The confirmation email arrived moments later, thanking him for his generous contribution to Russo Fine Arts. Adrian read it 3 times, then deleted it. This wasn't about recognition or redemption. It was just about helping something Isabella cared about continue to exist and grow, the way he should have been doing all along. Summer arrived with oppressive heat and the kind of humidity that made Manhattan feel like a sauna. Adrian's routine continued, running in the early mornings before the heat became unbearable, working on legitimate business deals that actually helped people instead of just enriching himself, volunteering at the programs he'd helped establish. "You know what's weird?" Marco said one afternoon, reviewing quarterly reports in Adrian's office. "The legitimate side of the business is actually more profitable than it used to be. People want to work with us because they trust us now, not because they're afraid of us." "Fear's expensive," Adrian replied, signing off on a construction contract. "It requires constant maintenance. Trust builds itself once you start earning it." "When did you get so philosophical?" "When I had nothing but time to think about everything I'd done wrong." Adrian set down his pen and looked at Marco, really looked at him. "Can I ask you something, honestly?" "Always." "Do you think I've actually changed, or am I just performing a different version of the same act?" Marco considered the question carefully. "I think you're trying to change. I think some days you succeed, and some days you backslide. But the fact that you're trying, that you're questioning yourself, that's new." The old Adrian never would have asked that question because he never would have doubted he was right. "That doesn't really answer whether I've changed. Maybe change isn't a destination, boss. Maybe it's just the act of trying, every day, to be a little better than you were yesterday." Adrian thought about that as he left the office that evening. The city was shifting from day to night, office workers heading home, restaurants preparing for the dinner rush. He walked instead of driving, letting himself be absorbed into the flow of humanity moving through Manhattan's streets. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Dinner Sunday. Your brothers will be there. Don't be late." He texted back a confirmation and kept walking, no particular destination in mind. He ended up in the Village, in front of the coffee shop where he'd met Isabella 15 years ago. It had changed ownership again. Now it was a craft beer bar with exposed brick and industrial lighting. Adrian went in and ordered a beer he didn't really want, sitting at a table near the window. The same window where Isabella had sat reading about Monet, where a chance conversation had led to 15 years of marriage and 2 years of painful transformation. "Adrian Moretti? Is that really you?" He looked up to find a woman standing beside his table, mid-40s, vaguely familiar, smiling with recognition. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Probably not. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I had a show at a gallery in Tribeca a few years ago. You were standing outside looking at my paintings through the window one evening." The memory clicked into place. The night he'd signed the divorce papers, walking through the city, standing outside a gallery, looking at paintings that reminded him of Isabella's work. "I remember. Your work was beautiful." "Thank you. Mind if I join you for a moment?" At Adrian's nod, Sarah slid into the seat across from him. "I always wondered if you'd come back to the gallery. The owner said you seemed really moved by the pieces. They reminded me of someone, my ex-wife. She used to paint." "Used to?" "I assumed she'd stopped. But recently I learned she's painting again, running a gallery in Providence, teaching classes, doing everything she always wanted to do." Sarah smiled. "That's wonderful. Good for her." "Yeah, good for her." Adrian took a drink of his beer. "Can I ask you something? You're an artist. What made you start painting again if you'd stopped? Who said I stopped? I just assumed. I never stopped, even when I was working 3 jobs to pay rent. Even when everyone said it was impractical and I should give up and do something sensible, I kept painting. Because it was the only thing that made me feel like myself. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. But I know a lot of artists who did stop, usually because someone in their life, partner, parent, whoever, convinced them their art didn't matter as much as more practical concerns. And you know what almost all of them say when they start again? What? That they feel like they can breathe again, like they'd been holding their breath for years without realizing it, and painting let them finally exhale. The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. That's exactly what Isabella's letter had said, that she needed to breathe again, that she'd been becoming a ghost in her own life. I was that person, Adrian said quietly. The one who convinced her that her art didn't matter as much as my empire, my business, my ambitions. I didn't do it maliciously, I just stopped seeing her, stopped valuing what made her herself. And now? Now she's free, and I'm trying to figure out how to live with the fact that her freedom required my absence. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. The fact that you understand that, really understand it, suggests you've learned something valuable. Most people never get there. After she left, Adrian sat alone finishing his beer and thinking about breathing, about how Isabella must have felt suffocating in the life he'd built around her, trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, about how her leaving had been the only way she could survive, and about how his greatest act of love was letting her stay gone. The summer passed into fall, the city transforming in its annual cycle of death and renewal. Adrian marked the 2-year anniversary of signing the divorce papers quietly, alone in the penthouse, thinking about how much had changed and how much remained the same. He was still alone, still living in the same space Isabella had fled, still building an empire, though now he tried to build it with purpose instead of just power. But he was different too, softer in some ways, more present, more willing to admit when he was wrong. On a Saturday in October, Adrian was at the Brooklyn Art Program, now expanded to 3 times its original size, helping students prepare for their annual exhibition. His phone rang with an unknown Rhode Island number. His heart stopped. He stepped outside to answer. Hello? Mr. Moretti, this is Grace Chen. I'm sorry to call on the weekend, but I wanted to let you know. We received the most extraordinary donation to the program today, from Russo Fine Arts in Providence. A gallery owner named Isabella Russo. Adrian's breath caught. What? She sent a check along with a note saying she'd heard about the program from students at RISD, and she wanted to support arts education in New York. She mentioned that she used to live here and knew how important programs like this were for kids who needed them. Grace paused. The note also said to send her thanks to the program's anonymous benefactor for inspiring her to do more. She knew. Somehow, Isabella had figured out that Adrian was behind the expansion of the arts program, had connected the dots despite his attempts to remain anonymous. Mr. Moretti, are you still there? Yeah, I'm here. That's wonderful, Grace. Thank you for letting me know. After the call ended, Adrian stood on the street outside the school, students' artwork visible through the windows behind him, and felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, exactly. He wasn't naive enough to think Isabella's donation meant she wanted contact or reconciliation, but maybe it meant she saw him trying, saw him becoming someone different than the man she'd left. Maybe that was enough. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning in early November, Adrian did something he'd been avoiding for 2 years. He drove to Providence. He didn't plan to see Isabella, didn't plan to go to her gallery or make contact in any way. He just needed to see the city where she'd rebuilt her life, to walk streets she walked, to breathe air that had touched her. Providence was smaller than New York, quieter, with a charm that came from history instead of ambition. Adrian parked near Brown University and walked, following the map on his phone toward the arts district where Russo Fine Arts was located. He found the gallery on a tree-lined street filled with cafes and boutiques. It was exactly as the website had shown, small, bright, welcoming. A sign in the window advertised an exhibition by emerging artists from RISD. Through the glass, Adrian could see paintings on white walls, sculptures on pedestals, people moving through the space admiring the work. But he didn't see Isabella. Adrian stood across the street, partially hidden by a coffee shop's outdoor seating, and just watched. Watched people enter and exit. Watched the gallery exist as this living thing Isabella had created. Watched her dream made tangible. He was about to leave, had turned to walk back to his car, when the gallery door opened and she stepped out. Isabella. 2 years older, her hair a little longer, dressed in jeans and a paint-stained sweater that reminded him of their early days. But the biggest difference was her face. She was smiling, really smiling, as she chatted with a young woman carrying a portfolio. The smile reached her eyes in a way Adrian hadn't seen in the last years of their marriage. She looked happy, actually, genuinely happy. Adrian's instinct was to cross the street, to call her name, to close the distance between them. But he didn't, because this moment wasn't about him. It was about seeing confirmation of what he'd hoped for, what he'd needed to know. Isabella was okay, more than okay. She was thriving. He turned and walked away before she could spot him, before he could disrupt her peace, before he could make this about his needs instead of her well-being. He made it 3 blocks before he had to stop, leaning against a building, breathing through the ache in his chest. She was happy. She was free. She was exactly where she needed to be, and he needed to let her stay there. Adrian drove back to New York with tears on his face, the first he'd cried since childhood, the first he'd let himself feel in 2 years of transformation. He cried for what he'd lost, what he'd destroyed, what he'd never get back, but also for what Isabella had found, for her freedom, her art, her smile. When he finally pulled into the garage beneath his building, the tears had stopped. Adrian sat in the car for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and typed a message to Jennifer Cho. I want to establish a foundation for arts education and supporting artists who need financial help to pursue their work. I want it to be substantial, enough to make a real difference. Can you help me set it up? The response came quickly. Of course. What do you want to call it? Adrian thought about Isabella painting their first apartment, Isabella teaching him about Monet, Isabella finally breathing free in a gallery she'd built herself, the Russo Foundation, for artists who need someone to believe in them. That's beautiful. I'll start the paperwork. Adrian climbed out of the car and rode the elevator up to the penthouse. The space felt different now, not empty exactly, just quiet, waiting for him to fill it with purpose instead of just possessions. He walked to the piano and sat down, placing his fingers on the keys. The simple melody Isabella had taught him flowed out more smoothly now, 2 years of practice showing in the way the notes connected, the way the music filled the silence. He would never get her back. That ship had sailed the moment she'd packed her closet and left divorce papers on the counter. But he could honor what she'd tried to teach him, could use the resources he'd built to help people the way he should have helped her, could become someone worthy of the love she'd once given him, even if that love was gone forever. The city lights began to glow beyond his windows as evening approached. Somewhere 2 hours north, Isabella was probably closing her gallery, maybe heading to dinner with friends, living a life that had nothing to do with Adrian Moretti and everything to do with the woman she'd always been meant to be. And Adrian was okay with that. Finally, genuinely okay with it. Because love, real love, meant wanting someone's happiness even when it excluded you, meant learning from your failures instead of just mourning them, meant becoming better not to win someone back, but because they'd shown you who you could be if you were brave enough to try. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Adrian was reading the newspaper at his kitchen counter when his phone rang. An unknown number, but the area code was local. Mr. Moretti? This is Rebecca Santos from the Metropolitan Museum. I'm calling about a donation we received yesterday for our arts education endowment. The donor listed you as the person to contact with questions. I didn't make a donation to the Met. Oh, I apologize for the confusion. The donation came from the Russo Foundation, but the paperwork listed you as... Oh, I see. You're the founder of the Russo Foundation. I'm so sorry. I should have realized. What was the donation for? Arts education for underserved youth in New York. It's incredibly generous, Mr. Moretti. This will fund our programs for years. After the call ended, Adrian pulled up the foundation's financial records. There it was, a substantial donation to the Met, authorized 3 days ago. Not by him, by Isabella. She had access to the foundation's funds. Adrian had set it up that way deliberately, naming her as a co-trustee even though they'd had no contact in 2 years. He'd wanted her to be part of it, to know that he was building something in her name with her values. He hadn't expected her to actually use the access. His phone buzzed with an email from an address he didn't recognize, but the subject line made his heart stop. Thank you. Adrian opened it with shaking hands. Adrian, I learned about the Russo Foundation from a student who received a grant. When my lawyer confirmed that I was listed as co-trustee, I'll admit I was surprised and touched and uncertain what to do with that information. I've spent 2 years building a life that doesn't include you. It's been hard, but necessary. I've remembered who I am when I'm not trying to be Mrs. Adrian Moretti. I've painted more in these 2 years than I did in the entire decade before. I've helped students find their voice through art. I've breathed. But I've also watched, from a distance, as you've apparently been doing something similar. The programs you've funded, the changes you've made, they haven't gone unnoticed. People talk, and what they say suggests that maybe you've been doing some breathing of your own. I want to be clear, this email is not an invitation to contact me. It's not a door opening to reconciliation or renewed friendship. You hurt me deeply, Adrian. You made me disappear inside a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like slowly drowning. But I also want to acknowledge that the foundation you created in my family's name is doing real good. That the man who would create something like that is different from the man I left. And that difference deserves recognition, even if it doesn't change anything between us. Use the foundation well, help people who need it, and be the person you're clearly trying to become. I wish you peace, Adrian. I really do. Isabella. Adrian read the email 5 times. Then he sat at the kitchen counter and let himself feel the full weight of it. She'd noticed. She'd been watching, even from a distance. She saw him trying, but she was also clear. This changed nothing between them. She'd built her freedom and had no intention of surrendering it, regardless of how much he'd changed. And that was okay. It had to be okay. Adrian closed his laptop and looked around the penthouse. It was time. Past time, really. Within a month, he'd listed the penthouse for sale. Downsized to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, closer to the neighborhoods where the foundation did its work. Sold the Mercedes and bought a practical sedan. Restructured his business to focus on legitimate construction and development that actually improved communities instead of just enriching himself. Marco thought he was crazy. His mother thought he was finally growing up. Theodore thought he was having a prolonged breakdown. Adrian thought he was finally, actually changing. 2 years after receiving Isabella's email, 4 years after she'd left, Adrian was walking through a small neighborhood grocery store in Brooklyn when he saw her. Isabella stood in the produce section, examining tomatoes with the same careful attention she'd once given to everything, her shopping basket looped over her arm. She wore simple clothes, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked older, they both were, but also somehow lighter. Their eyes met across a display of apples. For a moment, neither moved. The store continued around them, other shoppers, background music, the ordinary sounds of ordinary life. But Adrian felt frozen in place. Then Isabella smiled. Not a big smile. Not an invitation. Just a small, genuine acknowledgement of his existence. Adrian smiled back and nodded. A greeting. Nothing more. They moved through the store on separate paths, never speaking, never approaching. But as Adrian was checking out, he saw Isabella at the register next to his. She glanced over and he saw something in her eyes that might have been peace. "Take care, Adrian," she said quietly. "You too, Isabella. You look happy." "I am. I really am." She gathered her bags. "And you? Are you okay?" It was the first time she'd asked about his well-being in 4 years. The first time she'd spoken directly to him since leaving that note on the counter. Adrian felt the weight of the question, the genuine concern behind it. "I'm getting there," he said honestly. "Learning to be better. Trying to matter in ways that actually count." Isabella nodded, and for just a moment he saw something soft in her expression. Not love. That was gone, burned away by years of neglect and betrayal, but maybe forgiveness, or at least the absence of anger. Good. That's good. She started toward the exit, then paused and looked back. "The foundation is doing beautiful work, by the way. The student who received that grant I mentioned, she just had her first gallery show. You helped make that possible." "We helped make it possible," Adrian corrected gently. "It has your family's name for a reason." Isabella held his gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing across her face. Then she smiled again, that same small, genuine smile, and walked out into the afternoon sunshine. Adrian finished paying and carried his groceries to his car, this practical sedan that had replaced the Mercedes, and sat in the driver's seat not moving. That was it. That was probably all he'd ever get. A brief conversation in a grocery store. An acknowledgement that he'd changed. A moment of peace instead of pain. And it was enough. It had to be enough. Because Isabella was happy. She'd found herself again, was living the life she'd always deserved, was breathing free. And Adrian had learned, was still learning, to be someone who could look at himself in the mirror without flinching. He'd built an empire once, thinking that power and money and control were what mattered. Then he'd lost everything that actually did matter, and had to rebuild himself from scratch into someone better. The foundation would continue. The programs would help more students, more artists, more people who just needed someone to believe in them. Adrian's legitimate businesses would keep growing, keep improving neighborhoods, keep doing good in ways he'd never bothered to care about before. And Isabella would keep painting, keep teaching, keep living the life she'd chosen when she'd finally chosen herself. Adrian started the car and drove toward his apartment in Brooklyn, past neighborhoods he was helping improve, past schools where kids were learning art because he'd funded their programs, past the evidence of a life spent trying to matter in ways that counted. He'd conquered a city once, built an empire, become feared and powerful and completely alone. Then he'd lost the only thing that ever really mattered. But from those ashes, he'd built something different, something better. Not an empire, a legacy, not power, purpose. Isabella had given him that, in her own way, had shown him through her absence what he'd been too blind to see in her presence. That love meant supporting someone's dreams, not dismantling them. That partnership meant growing together, not demanding someone shrink to fit your vision. That being worthy of love required actually seeing the person offering it. He'd learned those lessons too late to save his marriage, but not too late to save himself. And as Adrian pulled into the parking lot of his modest Brooklyn apartment building, the city settling into evening around him, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, not peace, but something close to both. Acceptance. The acceptance that some mistakes couldn't be undone. That some people, once lost, stayed lost. That redemption wasn't about winning someone back. It was about becoming someone worthy of the love you'd already squandered. Adrian climbed the stairs to his apartment, groceries in hand, and smiled at the neighbor who was heading out. Inside, his space was small but comfortable. No penthouse views, no marble counters, just a home instead of a monument to success. He put away the groceries, made dinner from his mother's recipe, and sat at his small table eating alone while reading about a new arts program in Queens that needed funding. Later, he'd sit at the second-hand piano he'd bought and practice the melody Isabella had taught him years ago, his fingers finally finding the notes without stumbling. The king had lost his kingdom. The empire had fallen. And from its ruins, a better man was slowly, carefully emerging. Isabella was free, happy, living the life she'd always deserved. And Adrian Moretti was learning to live with the fact that her freedom had required his absence, that her happiness had cost him everything, and that sometimes the greatest act of love was letting someone go completely, even when it carved you hollow, even when it changed you forever, even when you'd spend the rest of your life becoming someone worthy of the second chance you'd already lost. The city lights glowed beyond his windows, smaller windows now, in a smaller space, in a quieter neighborhood. But through them, Adrian could see stars he'd never noticed from the penthouse. Small lights, distant, unreachable, but beautiful all the same.